They bulldozed my family's wheat fields at dawn, tore up a century of history, all because they thought a fancy garden would bring higher property values. But what they didn't know is that I still held the original deeds, the water rights, and a secret that would turn their entire community against them. This wasn't just about saving a farm. It became a fight for the soul of our town. The sharp slam of a car door jolted me awake from my afternoon nap on the porch. I rubbed my eyes, just in time to see a woman in a stark white pantsuit striding up my gravel driveway, heels sinking awkwardly into the loose stones. My old dog Bruno gave a half-hearted woof, but like me, he wasn't sure if this was worth getting up for. "Excuse me, you there?" she called out, waving a neon yellow piece of paper as if it were a badge of honor. I stood slowly, stretching my back from the morning's work, repairing the irrigation lines. "Yes, ma'am," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "James Miller. My family's farmed this land for 3 generations. What can I do for you?" She looked me up and down, her nose wrinkling slightly at my mud-streaked jeans and battered work boots. "Karen Whitfield," she said crisply, "President of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. I'm here to serve you an official violation notice." She shoved the paper into my hand. Puzzled, I unfolded it. A violation? For what? Our 600 acres had been here long before the Sunny Meadows development sprouted up across the road like some invasive weed. "Violation?" I asked, trying to keep my patience. "I'm not part of your HOA. Karen's red lipsticked mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your barn is an eyesore," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Several of our premium view properties can see it, and property values have dropped by 15% because of it." I glanced at the barn, the same one my grandfather had built in 1937, still standing proud despite peeling paint and a sagging roofline. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. It had fed families for nearly a century. "This barn's been here longer than you've been alive, ma'am," I said quietly. "Exactly," Karen chirped, pointing at the fine print on the violation notice. "You have 30 days to either repaint it or tear it down. Failure to comply will result in daily fines." I clenched my jaw, feeling my temper rise. "Again, I'm not part of your association. Your rules don't apply here." Karen's eyes gleamed. "We'll see about that," she said smoothly. Then, with a fake sweetness, she added, "By the way, what are you growing on that east field?" She pointed toward my winter wheat sprouting green and fresh. "Same as always," I replied cautiously. "Winter wheat." "Interesting," she murmured, tapping something into her phone. "The board will want to know about that." Without another word, she turned and clomped back to her shiny black SUV, dust kicking up behind her tires. I crumpled the violation notice and stuffed it into my jacket pocket, staring after her. For decades, our farm had sat peacefully at the edge of town. Now, city folks who couldn't tell corn from wheat wanted to regulate the land we'd bled over. I shrugged it off. At first, I had more important things to do. Fences to mend, livestock to check, crops to nurture. But later that evening, as I ladled chili into a bowl, the phone rang. It was Rick Thompson, my old childhood friend who now worked at the county clerk's office. "You better sit down, Jimmy," Rick said, voice tight. My heart dropped. "What's going on?" "Karen Whitfield came in today," Rick said. "She filed permits to develop part of your east field. She claims it was never properly surveyed into your property when your grandfather bought it." I nearly dropped the phone. "That's a lie. I've got deeds going back to 1937. "I believe you," Rick said, "but she's got papers too, and somehow they're properly stamped." "When are they starting?" I asked, voice low. "Tomorrow morning," Rick said. "Bulldozers at dawn, Jimmy. You need to find those deeds fast." I didn't even bother eating. I tore into my father's old filing cabinets, scattering papers across the kitchen table. Grandfather's original deeds, his maps, his land purchase records. Everything looked in order. Except one thing. A recent survey, one I had paid for just 5 years ago, showed a minor error on the eastern boundary line, 15 feet off, thanks to modern GPS mapping. Had Karen found a way to twist that tiny discrepancy into a full-blown land grab? I barely slept that night. I kept hearing the thud of bulldozers in my dreams. Morning couldn't come fast enough, and neither could the fight I knew was about to begin. The sun hadn't even crested the hills when the first rumble shook the farmhouse windows. I bolted upright in my chair, the kitchen table still cluttered with property deeds and yellowed maps from a sleepless night. My heart hammered as I shoved my feet into muddy boots and tore out the front door. What I saw stopped me cold. 3 massive bulldozers, painted bright yellow, rumbled down my dirt access road toward the east field. Dust clouds rose around them, turning the early morning light into a dirty haze. Leading the convoy, like some sort of conquering general, was Karen Whitfield in her gleaming SUV, the Sunny Meadows HOA logo slapped proudly across the doors. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling, and dialed the sheriff. Busy signal, again and again. The first bulldozer didn't even hesitate. It crashed through my east fence line like it wasn't there, ripping a gaping wound into my wheat field golden stalks, crops I had spent months planting and tending. Flattened under the metal beasts, I sprinted toward them, waving my arms frantically. "Hey, stop! You're on private property!" But no one even looked at me. The engines were too loud, or maybe they just didn't care. On the rise near the road, I spotted them. Karen and 5 other HOA board members, all standing in matching navy polos and khakis, sipping from branded Sunny Meadows coffee mugs like they were watching a 4th of July parade. I stormed up the hill toward them, heart pounding in my ears. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen didn't flinch. She turned slowly, surveying me with cool detachment. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she said smoothly. "We're commencing Phase 1 of the Sunny Meadows Community Expansion Project." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. Expansion project? On my land? Karen pulled a fat folder from her tote bag and flipped it open, revealing printed maps with red marker lines slashing across my east field. According to county records, this parcel was never properly surveyed when your grandfather purchased it. It's been designated as common land. I stared at the papers, stunned. They didn't match any deed I had ever seen. "This is a mistake," I said, voice shaking with fury. "This land has been in my family for nearly 100 years. I have the original deeds." Karen's tight smile returned. "I'm afraid the county recognizes these records now. You had 30 days to contest after the boundary adjustment notice was posted." "What notice?" I demanded. She shrugged, tucking the papers back into her bag. "It was posted on the county's online bulletin. Perhaps you missed it." Behind me, the bulldozers roared louder, digging deeper trenches into my wheat, destroying a full year's work with every pass. "You need to call them off," I said, stepping closer. Karen lifted her chin. "Progress is inevitable, Mr. Miller. Farming belongs to the past. Sunny Meadows is the future." Before I could respond, she turned away, her high heels clicking against the gravel as she climbed into her SUV. The other board members followed, tossing me disdainful looks like I was the nuisance here, left standing there alone, watching the bulldozers tear apart my crops. A deep sickness settled in my gut. I pulled out my phone again and called Rick, my friend at the county clerk's office. This time, he picked up on the first ring. "Rick," I said, voice tight. "They're bulldozing my east field right now. Tell me you found something." Rick sounded exhausted. "Jimmy, it's bad. Karen pushed through an emergency annexation vote last month while you were in the hospital with that broken leg. Filed the paperwork with adjusted boundaries using some sketchy signatures." "So it's fraud?" "In my opinion, absolutely," Rick said. "But it'll take time to prove time you don't have if they're already destroying your field." A sick realization twisted in my stomach. Time. That's what Karen was stealing from me more than anything. By the time courts caught up, the land would be bulldozed, paved over, and beyond saving, I watched helplessly as one of the bulldozers clipped the corner of my old irrigation system. Water gushed up in a glittering spray before the machine crushed the pipe beneath its treads. I couldn't let this stand. Somewhere deep inside me, a steel resolve hardened. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. And she didn't know it yet, but I had something she would never see coming. The sun hung low over my ruined wheat field when Rick pulled into my driveway, his truck kicking up angry clouds of dust. He slammed the door shut and hurried up the porch steps, clutching a thick file folder that looked like it had been yanked straight from the bowels of the county archives. "You're not going to like this," he said, not even waiting for me to invite him in. I pushed the broken screen door open wider and waved him toward the kitchen table, still covered with my family's old deeds and maps. Rick dropped the file with a heavy thud. "Karen didn't just fudge a few boundary lines," he said grimly, flipping through papers. "She orchestrated a full annexation plan 6 months ago, behind closed doors with the help of 2 county commissioners." I stared at him. "Annexation? Of what?" "Of your east fields and half your north pasture, too." Rick jabbed a finger at a photocopied zoning map, red lines sliced across my land like open wounds. They labeled it as Unincorporated Development Reserve Public Land, free for community projects provided no one contested it. My stomach twisted. But it was never public. It was ours. It still is. Rick nodded fiercely. They counted on you not noticing in time. Small postings buried deep on the county website. No mailed notices. No newspaper announcements. I ran a hand through my hair, furious. How is that even legal? It's not, Rick said. But by the time these things get challenged in court, the land's usually already developed, and judges hate undoing construction that's already benefiting the community. Benefit the community? I thought bitterly, glancing out the window at the wreckage of my crops. This was benefiting Karen's real estate empire, no one else. Rick lowered his voice. There's more. He pulled out a faded document from 1962, the year my grandfather finalized the family's water rights. Your family didn't just own the farmland, Jimmy. They owned the entire groundwater basin underneath most of Sunny Meadows. And according to this, he tapped the page, you still do. I leaned closer, reading the dry legalese. In short, any attempt to alter the land, including construction or landscaping that affected the natural watershed, required permission from the basin owner, me. I blinked, stunned. They bulldozed my land without my permission and tampered with the basin? Rick nodded. Which means every pipe, every sprinkler system they're installing right now is technically illegal. The implications hit me like a thunderclap. Karen hadn't just overstepped a little. She'd blown through multiple environmental and property laws like a runaway train, and she had no idea the tracks ended here. And if the county signed off on this knowing about the basin rights? I said slowly. Rick grinned for the first time all morning. Then it's not just a civil matter, it's a federal one. The stakes had just skyrocketed. Suddenly, my fight wasn't just about a few acres of wheat anymore. It was about the water under an entire community, and the legal leverage that came with it. I looked Rick dead in the eye. How fast can we move? He slapped the file folder shut. Already called Sandra, he said, referring to my old college friend turned high-powered attorney. She's on her way. Out the window, Karen's bulldozers rumbled in the distance, plowing deeper into the soil they thought they owned. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. They had no idea the storm that was about to break over Sunny Meadows. The courthouse was already buzzing when I arrived, my boots clacking against the marble floors that echoed with tension. Reporters crowded the front steps, craning for a glimpse of the farmer who had somehow brought the mighty Sunny Meadows HOA to the brink of collapse. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only. Neighbors, farmers, HOA board members. Even the county commissioner himself sat stiffly in the back row, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Karen Whitfield entered next, her heels sharp against the floor, dressed like she was attending a gala instead of a legal showdown. She wore a navy suit and a bright white smile, one that dimmed the moment she spotted Rick and me setting up our evidence at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Doug Wilson leaned in and whispered something to her. She nodded tightly, but I caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. Sandra, my attorney, stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, we are here today to address multiple counts of unlawful land seizure, falsification of public records, and violation of federally protected water rights. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and tired eyes, leaned forward. Is the defendant aware of the seriousness of these charges? Karen's attorney, a young man who looked barely out of law school, stammered out a yes. The evidence came first. Deed after deed, survey after survey. Layer upon layer of proof showing that the farmland Karen had bulldozed was not only mine, but protected by easements signed decades ago. The judge's frown deepened with each document Sandra presented. Karen's attorney tried to object several times, claiming good faith misunderstanding, clerical errors, and even community interest. Each time the judge waved him off with an icy glare. Then Rick stood, holding a dusty old file, the 1962 groundwater map. Your Honor, he said, voice steady, this proves Mr. Miller retains full rights over the groundwater basin that services Sunny Meadows. A murmur ran through the courtroom. And when Ms. Whitfield authorized construction that altered natural drainage without Mr. Miller's consent, Rick continued, she didn't just violate local property law, she violated federal environmental regulations. The judge turned sharply to Karen's table. Ms. Whitfield, did you or did you not authorize these actions? Karen finally stood, smoothing her skirt. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Your Honor, we acted in the community's best interest. Our goal was to increase property values and improve neighborhood aesthetics. The judge's eyes narrowed. You mean to tell me that bulldozing another citizen's land without ownership verification was in the community's best interest? Karen opened her mouth but faltered. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. Sandra seized the moment. Your Honor, we also have a signed affidavit from County Clerk Helen Barnes stating she was pressured by members of the Sunny Meadows HOA to expedite permits based on falsified documents. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned back, steepling her fingers. Ms. Whitfield, you're facing allegations of fraud, coercion, and unlawful destruction of private property. Karen's lawyer whispered furiously in her ear, but Karen shook her head, face flaming with rage and humiliation. I move to suspend all HOA operations related to Mr. Miller's land pending full criminal investigation, Sandra declared. The judge slammed her gavel. Motion granted effective immediately. Across the room, homeowners muttered. Some clapped softly. Others openly glared at Karen. But the real blow came next. The judge added, and based on preliminary evidence, I am ordering a full forensic audit of the Sunny Meadows HOA finances. Karen's face collapsed, her carefully constructed mask crumbling into something raw and panicked. Doug tried to protest, but the bailiff cut him off. Outside, the news crews swarmed, microphones thrust in my face. Mr. Miller, what's your next move? I looked straight into the nearest camera. To finish what my grandfather started. Protecting this land, for everyone who calls this county home. Behind me, Karen stood frozen on the courthouse steps, her empire beginning to crumble around her expensive heels. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the real war. The news of the courtroom ruling spread like wildfire. By the time I pulled back into town, the once quiet streets of Oak Ridge were buzzing, not with gossip this time, but with something stronger, a fierce, growing sense of unity. That night, the townsfolk called an emergency gathering. Not at City Hall, not at the HOA clubhouse. No, the people chose my farm. One by one, pickups and beat-up sedans rolled in, headlights piercing the twilight. Families I hadn't seen in months. Elders with walking canes, kids clinging to their parents' hands. They came carrying lawn chairs, homemade casseroles, thermoses of coffee, whatever they could bring. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to stand together. I lit the old bonfire pit near the barn, and under the rising smoke, we gathered Mrs. Carter, who once feared speaking at any HOA meeting, stood up first. Tears rimmed her eyes as she clutched a yellowed deed. My grandfather fought for this land, she said, voice shaking but proud. We forgot that somewhere along the way, we forgot we belonged here first. Thank you, James, for reminding us. The crowd murmured, nodding, wiping eyes. Next came Mr. Patel, whose family-owned grocery store had almost closed after HOA harassment. We were told to stay quiet to fit their mold. But we're not here because we fit. We're here because we belong. We built this town with our hands, and no board, no fake smiles will erase that. Applause rose like a wave through the night air. One by one, voices poured out. Stories of small injustices, silences swallowed, dreams deferred under the heavy hand of a few who thought money could rewrite history. I looked around, heart hammering. These weren't just my neighbors anymore. They were family. Standing on the back of my old flatbed truck, I raised my hand to quiet the crowd. I don't have fancy speeches, I began, throat thick. I'm just a farmer, a son of this dirt, like many of you. The crowd leaned closer, the crackling fire painting their faces in gold. But I know this, I said, voice growing stronger. This fight, it's bigger than a bulldozed field. It's about standing up when it's easier to sit down. It's about remembering where we came from and who we are. A hush fell. Even the night birds seemed to listen. We're not just fighting for old barns or wheat fields. We're fighting for the right to live without fear, to know that our homes, our families, our memories matter. Someone started clapping, then another, until the whole crowd was on their feet, cheering, whooping, some wiping away tears, some pumping fists into the smoky sky. Hope roared louder than any bulldozer that night. Mrs. Carter pressed something into my hand before she left. A small, faded photo of her standing beside my grandfather decades ago at the county fair, smiling under the same stars. You keep this safe, she said, voice trembling. It's proof that no matter what they try, this town's heart beats here. And as the embers of the bonfire floated into the sky, I realized we weren't just defending farmland anymore, we were reclaiming home. The tides had turned. And this time, they were on our side. The days after the community reckoning were some of the hardest and some of the most beautiful I'd ever lived. The first morning after the bonfire meeting, I walked out onto my ruined east field. Where golden wheat once danced in the breeze, there were only muddy ruts and broken stalks now, crushed by bulldozers and greed. For a moment, my chest tightened with grief, but then I heard the low rumble of trucks and laughter, and the clinking of tools being unloaded. Turning, I saw them, neighbors arriving one by one, pickup beds overflowing with seeds, tools, fence posts, and smiles brighter than the sunrise. Mr. Patel brought irrigation pipes. Mrs. Carter carried crates of heirloom tomato starters. Even the high school kids came, shovels slung over their shoulders, ready to work. No one asked for money. No one waited for permission. They simply showed up, because rebuilding what was ours was a matter of honor now. We started small, patching fences, tilling soil, clearing the wreckage left behind by Karen's bulldozers. By noon, sweat dripped from our brows, but the field, our field, was coming back to life. Children ran through the soft dirt, planting rows of sunflowers along the edge as a living border. Elders sat under the old oak tree, directing the young ones where to lay irrigation lines, telling stories of how their own grandparents had worked these lands with nothing but horses and grit. It wasn't just restoration, it was rebirth. The local diner delivered sandwiches and lemonade. The volunteer fire department showed up with hoses to wet the ground. Even a few former HOA members, those who had once kept their heads down, walked over sheepishly, offering help. And you know what? We welcomed them. Because building something better meant forgiving too. Not forgetting, but choosing unity over division. As the sun dipped low, bathing the valley in molten gold, I stood on the porch, my dog Bruno at my side, watching the last of the day's work wrap up. The east field wasn't perfect. The rows were crooked, the soil was scarred, but it was ours, and it was growing again, Mrs. Gonzalez, the new interim HOA president after Karen's fall, walked up to me, her boots muddy, hair escaping her bun. "We were thinking," she said, glancing back at the crowd, "maybe next spring we host a real community garden, not on stolen land, right here, with your blessing." I felt something catch in my throat. Not sadness, not anger, but pride. "Only," I said, smiling, "if we name it after the people who saved it." She laughed through teary eyes. "Deal." As twilight wrapped around us, guitars came out. Kids roasted marshmallows over little campfires, and somewhere deep inside I realized this place, our home, had never been about barns or fields alone. It was about the hands that built them, the hearts that fought for them, the roots we planted, not just in soil but in each other. The harvest wouldn't just be wheat this year, it would be hope, and this time it would feed everyone. Just when we thought we had turned the tide, the darkness struck back. It started subtly, whispers at the diner, strange cars idling near the edge of my property at night, headlights flashing into my windows at 3 a.m. Bruno growled low every time he heard footsteps crunching gravel in the dead of night. At first, we brushed it off, but then the real attacks began. One morning, I found my mailbox smashed in and a spray-painted message on my fence. "You'll lose everything." That afternoon, a fire broke out in my equipment shed, the one my grandfather built with his own hands. We put it out before it spread, but the smell of burnt wood clung to the air for days, a constant reminder that someone out there wanted to break us. Even the new community projects weren't safe. Seedlings were ripped from the soil at night, garden beds were trampled under heavy boots. Whoever was behind it wasn't just angry, they were desperate because they knew they were losing. At the heart of it all, Karen's shadow still loomed, even though she had been forced off the HOA board. Rumors swirled that she was quietly marshaling allies, powerful family connections, political favors, deep pockets determined to overturn the county investigation. And then came the final straw. Late one evening, just as I was locking up the barn, headlights flared across the field. A black SUV tore across my property, ripping through fences, scattering chickens in a frenzy. The vehicle skidded to a stop a few yards from me. The window rolled down. Karen's unmistakable voice cut through the night air like a dagger. "You think you've won?" she spat. "You're nothing, a dirt farmer standing in the way of progress." I stepped closer, heart pounding but steady. "You're wrong," I said quietly. "This isn't about one farm anymore. It's about all of us." She laughed bitterly. "You think those people will stick by you? Wait until the lawsuits hit." Wait until the banks freeze your accounts. You're scared, I said, realizing it in that moment, because you know you can't bury the truth under concrete. Her face twisted in rage. You have no idea who you're messing with, she snarled, gunning the engine. And you have no idea how many people you've already lost, I replied. She roared off into the night, tires spitting gravel, leaving behind only the sharp, acrid stink of her anger. But the damage had been done, to her. The next morning, my lawyer Sandra called, her voice tight with excitement. They overplayed their hand, she said. We have them. Bank fraud, land fraud, conspiracy to commit property theft, and with the fire last week, possible charges for arson. Evidence was piling up faster than Karen could bury it. The county was furious. The state was getting involved. And for the first time, Karen Whitfield, Queen of Sunny Meadows, wasn't just facing angry neighbors, she was facing the law. The final unraveling had begun, and no matter how many threats they hurled, no matter how many shadows they sent to creep across our fields, we were ready to bring it all into the light. The courthouse was packed. Neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder on the worn wooden benches. Reporters crowded near the front, cameras flashing every time Karen Whitfield so much as adjusted her pearl necklace. I sat near the front with Rick, Sandra, and Maria Gonzalez, the new HOA president elected after our uprising. Beside me, old farmers, young families, retirees, all the people, Karen once bullied into silence, now standing together. When the bailiff called the court to order, the tension was electric. Karen's defense team tried everything, pleading misunderstanding, clerical errors, even accusing me of forging the real documents. But evidence doesn't lie. Witnesses don't forget. Sandra presented the original land surveys, Rick produced the forged permits and doctored property maps. County officials testified how signatures were backdated, how environmental protections were ignored, how HOA funds had been siphoned off to private accounts. Then came the final blow. Sheriff Davis, once hesitant, now stood firmly at the witness stand. We were manipulated, he admitted solemnly. I believed their lies at first. But the evidence brought forward proved this wasn't about safety or community values. It was about greed. Karen didn't even look up. She just sat there staring into nothing, her world collapsing around her. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was like a hammer striking steel. This court finds Karen Whitfield and associated Sunny Meadows HOA board members guilty of property fraud, document tampering, and conspiracy to commit theft. Cheers erupted, stifled quickly by the bailiff, but the spirit couldn't be silenced. I glanced around the courtroom and saw tears glistening in people's eyes, tears not just of relief, but of something deeper. Of justice. Karen was sentenced to years of probation, heavy fines, and a lifetime ban from serving on any board or association. Civil lawsuits followed swiftly. Homeowners demanded restitution for the damages, and the entire Sunny Meadows HOA was ordered dissolved and restructured under county oversight. But the bigger victory wasn't in the courtroom papers. It was outside, in the golden fields. 3 months later, I stood once again on the porch of my family's farmhouse, the sunset painting the sky in fire and gold. Children raced down the dirt roads, dogs barked joyfully, and families picnicked under the oak trees. Where bulldozers once tore up my wheat, new crops now grew stronger than ever, nourished not just by rain and soil, but by a community that had finally remembered what it meant to stand together. The old barn, blackened by fire, was rebuilt, this time by volunteers from every corner of the county. Bruno lay sleeping by the steps, content in the peace we'd reclaimed. As the first stars began to blink awake overhead, Rick clapped me on the back. "You didn't just save the land, Jimmy," he said quietly. "You saved the soul of this town." I looked across the fields, our fields, and smiled. Karen Whitfield had tried to destroy everything we stood for. But in the end, it was her empire of lies that crumbled, while ours, built on truth, family, and faith in each other, would stand for generations more. And the creek flowed on, as it always had, whispering through the fields, "You cannot bulldoze the roots of a community." In life, it's easy to feel small against forces bigger than ourselves. A powerful HOA, a corrupt official, a tide of change that seems impossible to stand against. But as we saw in this story, roots run deeper than concrete. Truth flows stronger than lies, and one voice, when joined by others, can turn into a river no wall can hold back. It's a reminder that land isn't just dirt underfoot, it's memories, it's sacrifice, it's the invisible thread tying generations together. And community? It's not about fences or bylaws or polished sidewalks. It's about neighbors who show up for each other when it matters most. We may live in a world of fast deals and flashing screens, but integrity, loyalty, and courage, those are timeless. So if you ever find yourself standing alone, fighting for what's right, remember, you're never truly alone. The spirit of those who built before you, and those who will come after, stand with you. And sometimes, all it takes to change the world is to stand your ground on the land you call home.